Okay. I call to order the October 2022 meeting of the Governance and Policy Committee. Good morning, everyone. Our first item on today's agenda is the continuation of our discussion around the board's public engagement opportunities. Executive Director Steves will be joined by Maggie Flauten. I'll get it right eventually. Sorry. Flauten. Communications and Engagement Manager, to take us through the information the Office of the Board of Regents put together in response to last month's discussion. Executive Director Steves, would you please start us off?
Absolutely. Madam Chair, members of the committee, we're delighted to be back today to talk a little bit more about board public engagement. It's, as is the case with many of these kinds of conversations, many of the conversations we've had in Governance and Policy Committee in the past, it takes time for the group to work through the information and make sense of it and develop some sort of a consensus. And so I appreciate you bearing with us as we're going through this process. It sometimes feels like it's a slow-moving boat, but it does yield results, and we really appreciate it. Today's discussion will focus on several things. We'll review the resolution that was actually referred to this committee. We'll follow up on questions that were raised in September and some additional information we've been able to gather. We'll look at some peer examples and those institutions that have these kinds of practices in place and what we've learned about them since last month. And then we've framed up some discussion questions to try and have it be that today is spent in part on you having a dialogue with one another about where you may want to go with this. So turning to the public comment resolution. So in June of 2022, a resolution was introduced for consideration, and we've captured the resolved clauses here. And what it suggested was that in consultation with the Governance and Policy Committee, there be a framework developed around regular occurring public comments, or a public comment period at Board of Regents meetings, and that our office, the board office, develop a framework for implementation of that and review and present it to the board for review. In large part, what happened is the resolution was referred to this committee, and committee leadership then built it into the work plan. It happened. It was rather timely. It was kind of an opportune moment to build it into the work plan, and so that is, in many ways, what's been happening. This kind of consultation and work is ongoing here, and that's what's been happening. So it was just a good refresher as to how this landed on the agenda, what we're working through as we move forward. And with today's discussion, largely a large amount of the resolution would actually have been satisfied, and depending on the conversation today, we anticipate that the board office staff would come back with some sort of a recommendation for consideration in December. Just as a reminder of kind of the broad conversation we had last month around how boards create accountability, we talked about open meetings and shared governance and policies and a variety of things, but today we'll focus primarily on public forums and direct contact. And so that's really we're narrowing the focus a bit today and focusing more on those elements of the kind of this infrastructure of accountability that we talked about. Just as a refresher, current practices here in this board and with this university is that this board has a tradition of holding an annual budget forum, a public forum where folks can come and comment, and then other forums as required by law. And we talked a little bit about those traffic ordinances. I can't remember, there was body cameras. Yeah, so there's some that are required by law, and we've certainly adhered to those as well. The process for addressing the board, as you may recall, the board's bylaws do have a provision where individuals can request to speak to the board. The board chair rules on those requests. We looked back, we do not have a centralized tracking of kind of the whole history of those requests, but we did look back over the last 24 months just to see if we could give kind of a flavor for how frequently does this happen, what's the nature of it. And over the past 24 months, we've received 4 requests for speaking to the board or a committee, and one of those was granted. And really, there aren't any criteria that are outlined in the board's bylaws for how the chair should consider those, or any criteria that the chair might need to apply to those. It's simply the chair's discretion. Although I will say that just having experienced working with a number of board chairs, one of the very first things they look at is this an item that's relevant to the item on our agenda? Sometimes the requests come in and they're about a topic that's not on the agenda that month. My own anecdotal experience is that chairs tend to decline those. We have 1 regent who is a student at time of election, 8 non-voting student representatives to the board. There are oral and written reports from the Senate Consultative Committee and the Faculty Consultative Committee each semester, as well as written reports from the P&A Consultative Committee and Civil Service Consultative Committee annually. I know that Regent Kenyanya, you had asked about that, and that primarily happens through that channel, as well as just the infrastructure of shared governance that consults as policies and other matters go through the University Senate. And then, as we talked about last time as well, Regent emails are directly available to the public, and those, anyone who uses those emails, they go directly to the Regent. There is no filter or anything like that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Flatten, who will briefly refresh on what other peers do, and then some additional information that we were able to gather since last month.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. This should look familiar. We reviewed this sort of continuum last month in the meeting. And again, our peers have a wide variety of styles and ways that they accept public comment. And so our peers on the left side there have no opportunities, and then ranging all the way over to the other side, where Maryland has a fairly open process. So in order to collect a little bit more information about the questions that were asked, I reached out to some of our colleagues, and what I'll present here now is just questions that we asked them, and then the responses in comparison to our practices here at Minnesota. So starting with Indiana, and Indiana, as your call, is on that far left end of the continuum, where they don't really have any standard practice for public comment at their meetings. Indiana has a similar open meeting law that they're required to abide by in their state, similar to ours, I should say. They do have a forum on their biennial tuition vote. They ask that members of the university community submit written comments. Those comments are actually submitted in writing by members of the community, and then their secretary reads those aloud in their meetings, and so they're captured for the public record in that way. Again, the university community is asked to reach out via email with any topics of concern. They do have 1 student trustee who does have full voting rights, and they have standing student and faculty reports at all of their regular meetings. Also, just important to note here that their direct emails to the trustees are not available to the public, and so correspondence is traditionally sent or centrally sent to their secretary in their board office, and not directly to their members.
So just to be clear,
yes,
on that 3rd bullet, and I apologize, where they're asked to reach out via email, it's to that central email address, and then their board office disseminates that to the other email addresses.
That's correct. Moving on then to looking at our peers at Illinois, again, they have a similar open meeting law as we have. They, again, collect requests and grant requests from their board to address the board. And about 75% of their requests are granted. And so they have about a 75% success rate, so to speak, of requests to the board. They do have 3 student trustees. Only one of those 3 has full voting rights. The other 2 are, I think, in a similar capacity to our student representatives, where they're at the table but don't have a vote. Their board chair meets regularly with University Senate Conference, and that includes faculty from across their university system. Again, here, similar to Indiana, we see that they don't have direct email addresses to their trustees. We also got in touch with our colleagues in Iowa, and again, they have a similar open meeting law, and theirs is a little more specific about which meetings can be closed, but most of their, similar to our meetings that are open, very similar law. They only have, they've only had one meeting in recent history where someone was turned away due to time limitations. Otherwise, they're not filling all of their space for speaker slots. That is, the demand does not exceed the spaces. They do sometimes have folks who come in and talk about irrelevant topics, but they weigh that against free speech and allow those folks to speak in the meetings. They have one student regent who has full voting rights. And again, they have this regular interaction with student leaders and with faculty, but they have no formal interactions with staff that they could present. So that's something different that they don't have. In Iowa, they do have direct email addresses that are available to the public that go right to the regents. And in Nebraska, their open meeting law actually specifies not only that their meetings have to be open, but that there has to be an opportunity for members of the public to speak at those meetings. And so this is where their open meeting law dictates the fact that they have to have a forum for members of the public to speak. Speakers are never turned away if they've signed up in advance and they have 3 minutes to address the board. For student body presidents, so a student body president from each of the campuses serves as a student regent, a non-voting student regent. Their faculty senate attends the meetings, but there's no other engagement, no other formal engagement. And again, here their email addresses are available to the public. And finally, our last example, California. They again have a similar open meeting law. Speakers have to sign up the day before the meeting, and then depending on demand, how many speakers they have, they give anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes for those individuals to address the board. They have one student board member with full voting rights, and their academic, their academic senate chair and vice chair serve as faculty representatives on the board, but with no voting rights, but a formal affiliation from their faculty representation. And then here again, we see we're going back to the no direct email addresses available to the public.
All right, so we shared what we could gather in this interim period of time based on the conversation in question, and we also then have kind of taken a step back and looked at some of the observations, what we as staff have learned, and maybe considerations that you might also find relevant. Revisiting the goals of trusteeship that we talked about last month, it's to act in the long-term best interest of the institution and create trust and demonstrate accountability. We find that there aren't really any clear best practices related to public comment or direct contact. It really seems like it's practices vary from institution to institution based on perhaps state law or whatever their tradition or precedent has been. Things like direct contact by email certainly are, institutions are all over the map on that. And so it seems like in many ways, in our view, that institutions have created what we're calling a custom fit. They've each decided what it is that, in terms of public engagement, works best for their institution, or is both honoring whatever tradition they've had and is reflecting whatever today's practices or priorities are for their board. We've also noticed that boards that do take regular input have generally not leveraged technology or reflected some of the new, and this is obviously mostly during the pandemic, things have accelerated in this space quite rapidly, but they have not taken advantage or evolved to more of the hybrid work style of today's work. And so it's predominantly in-person or telephone speakers that seems to be the means by which those that do take regular public input have that happen in their board. So it's, arrive and there's a microphone and someone stands up and says their thing, or they dial in or call in and are there via speakerphone or something. And so it's just an observation because we think that perhaps there could be some opportunity for considering different or emerging technologies as a way to capture public input in a different way than what maybe traditionally has been possible. All right, so turning to some of the discussion questions that we outlined, what are the most effective ways for this board to build trust and demonstrate accountability? Recognizing that public engagement practices evolve over time, what is the custom fit that Minnesota needs today? And how might technology aid in advancing access and engagement across the university community? So we throw those out because we feel like that kind of a conversation would be helpful to us in shaping some kind of a recommendation to bring back to you, but also just so that this group can maybe work toward getting to a consensus around what it is you'd like to do. And please forgive that first bullet is in italics. We tried to get that out of italics so many different ways and times, but it keeps showing up in italics. So it's not intentional.
Well, it showed up in basic in our PDF, so.
Well, so there, in the PDF, it's just normal font, and
It's
here it
just
just
messing with you.
keeps coming back. So there it is.
Thank you, Ms. Flotten and Executive Director Steves, for the presentation, for gathering that information, for talking with those peer institutions to really kind of pick their brain and see what they've experienced, but also how they structure their processes and in engaging the public in different ways. As regents gather their thought and we move to discussion, just a couple items that came to mind as we're going through this, and the first of which is really what are we striving to accomplish in evaluating our public engagement? And is it that we are seeking to fit a very narrow need of people appearing directly in front of us, as Ms. Flotten is sitting, or are we seeking to provide opportunities for people to reach us in different ways? We do all have our email that people can reach out to. They can reach out to us in the community. You know, particularly looking at the California example, 1 minute is not a very long time to address a body, and to think that time could be compressed that short. As someone who's trying to carry a concept forward to a governing body, I would be concerned about the briefness of that amount of time. There's not a lot you can get in 60 seconds when it comes to making a comment. And also thinking about some of the aspects of our university. We have campuses across the state. We have stakeholders around the world. If we're seeking more public engagement, how can we leverage technology and opportunities to providing access, if that's what we're seeking to do? And Executive Director Steves, your item, particularly on technology and aiding that is really important. You know, I think about your comment that many still require people to appear in person or only by phone. And it's one thing to offer the option to appear by phone, but it's another to not offer an option to present visually as well. And also keeping in mind that our community encompasses everyone, and not everyone is comfortable speaking. So we do have written opportunities. Not everyone wants to write or is able to write in a way that they want to, and so being able to speak or present orally can be very important. And how do we think about those types of things? And really, one thing I've been wrestling with as we go through this process is how can we as the university be innovative in how we do this? Not just do what someone else is doing or take bits and pieces of what other people are doing, but how can we as a university be innovative in how we are engaging the public at large and in encouraging people to engage with us? And one idea that comes to mind, and I don't believe, at least I haven't seen an example of this being done at a higher education institution, and so I'm looking to Executive Director Steves to let me know if he knows of one. But There are technologies out there whereby someone doesn't need to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Friday in Minnesota, which could be 6 a.m. elsewhere, which could be the middle of the night around the world. But they're still able to engage visually, by voice only, or in writing. And the example that comes to mind is actually in use by our own Office of Administrative Hearings here in Minnesota. They've instituted a technology, and I'm not going to identify the technology because I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities out there, or platforms out there that might do this. But they've instituted a technology in some of their public comment proceedings whereby people can, for a period of time, and it's set by the office, so whether it's a week or a few days, connect to this platform, record a video up to 3 minutes or whatever timeline is set, record a video, record audio only, or submit a written comment on topics. And it can be narrow topics, it can be a broad list of topics, it can be XYZ. And then those comments are brought forward into the record. They're all recorded. Every clip is played in sequence, and it becomes, a living visual recorded document. And in one example, they had previously, the Office of Administrative Hearings had an annual proceeding. So it's something every year they gather public comment on. And in the most recent year, they had received 2 public comments. And when they instituted this approach, they received 76 public comments. And it gave them just a different opportunity for the public to engage without it being either attending a specific meeting, which would have been a WebEx, but able to engage in their time, what was convenient for them, and communicate what they needed to. And in thinking about that, it's something that, from an innovative standpoint, would certainly be a new opportunity to think about for the university, but also to think about in a way of piloting it, not making it a permanent, yes, this is what we're doing henceforth from here and forever, but thinking about maybe phasing it in over a period of a year, testing it out, seeing how it works, getting feedback on it, and then deciding whether it's something to continue with or further modifications should happen, or it's not working the way we want to. So those are just some things that I throw out there for others to consider as you all consider your questions, comments, and as we give our board office direction to take this to the next step in our December meeting. Ken, and then Steve, and then Janie.
Chair Verheugen, thank you. So just some clarifying questions on the this method that you've just described. So all of the comments are received and filed, and then, they're in a portal that's open to the public, so anyone can look at them.
Yes.
And then are there any, so there's no cap on the number of people who can speak? Are there any other kind of limits, time limits, or you can do as much as you want? I mean, do they cap those in any way? And also it's written, phone, video, you
Yep.
choose the mode.
Correct. That's my understanding, and that's how I've seen it interacted with. There have been time limits, and those are set by, if there's a specific topic and we would want to give 5 minutes, or if there's a narrow topic, we want to give 3 minutes. And then, we as a body could decide, do we put it all together in one YouTube video and post it? Do we keep it in individual clips somewhere, so if people want to interact with it, they can? And then, setting the time frame. So for example, if we set it specific to comments on items of action on the Board of Regents agenda, then we set an end timeline for people to interact with it so that we have time to digest it as well.
Thank you.
Regent Bingham?
Madam Chair, thank you. I'm intrigued by the idea of using technology in some way, shape, or form. I'm probably the most tech challenged person here, but I'm certainly intrigued by that. But my question, Maggie, would be on the peer example, Indiana, if you Google Indiana, and the last bullet, where trustee emails are made open to the public. In this and in past lives, I've tried to treat emails or letters or correspondence with me in a confidential way. I thought that would be respectful of the people that write me, that they don't want it put in the paper or calling the press or whatever. I'm surprised, I don't know how the other board members feel or how they treat that, but I believe that confidentiality trust is important rather than making everything open to the public. Do other board members feel the same, or am I wet about, treating with confidentiality somebody's correspondence with me?
Regent Rosha?
Well, Madam Chair, I mean, they're subject to data practice requests in the first instance. So when I receive an email that's not protected by attorney-client privilege, I presume that it's subject to being available to the public, and when I respond, I assume there's a good chance that they'll print it and hand it out. So I think I may approach that differently than you do.
I guess I've always treated it confidentiality-wise. That's,
And
I've never gone to the press or other people.
if I can just weigh in, I think what you're saying is exactly correct, Regent Rosha. It's, if someone requests them, they're available. But what I think I hear you saying is when a parent or an individual reaches out to you or a stakeholder reaches out to you, you don't feel like you can necessarily discuss that publicly. You might discuss it amongst regents or the board or forward it as necessary, but it's not something that you would necessarily actively be sharing in a public forum. Is that what I'm hearing you say? Or are you thinking?
I would not share the letter or the email directly. I'd maybe share some comments that were made by the email or the letter, as we add to the discussion. Maybe I've been lucky that I've never been asked the Data Privacy DPA Act.
Well, I mean,
until I got here to the Regents. 30 years in the legislature, I was never DPA'd, but I get here and I get DPA'd.
and that's what I was just going to say is, with your history in the legislature, legislators, there is a provision for elected officials to treat correspondence from non-other elected officials as private data.
Oh, okay, very good. That's
We
clarification.
don't have that.
That's why I was able to do that.
We don't treat them that way as regents, yeah.
Okay. I just think protecting people's individual private comments is a good thing. I don't like going out and spreading everything to the paper or the press or, somebody should be trustfully, if they want to contact me about an issue, know that I'm just not going to go and use it in a positive or negative way, one way or another. But that's just the way.
May I interject?
You can if Executive Director Steve says it's okay, because he was elbowing me.
Oh, go ahead.
No. Ms. Flotten, you start and I'll add on.
I was just going to say that with the peer example at Indiana, they are requesting submitting comments on their biennial tuition forum. If they have a practice similar to ours, I'm sure that when individuals are writing those comments, they're made aware that those comments are going to be made available to the public. So in our practice of requesting feedback on the biennial budget, on the annual operating budget, when we get those comments via the website, it's very clearly stated there that the names and the email, or the names will be made public along with the comments in the board's materials.
Thank you, as long as people are aware of that.
And my assumption is that Indiana's practice is probably similar to that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Madam Chair, that's exactly the point I would make, and I would just add that we also say in our kind of upfront, when you're going to submit a comment in this model, that we reserve the right to edit out your comment if you are using profanity or if you are, inappropriate, or if, for instance, you're sharing private personnel data or things like that. So we would need to, in whatever format there is, we would need to have some caveats and some rules that would still be in place because we as an institution have responsibilities. And so we would have to work with probably the General Counsel's office to make sure that we had the appropriate protections in place.
And no matter what public forum engagement, if we move that direction we would need to put together a whole new set of, or revised set of
that's right.
engagement. Okay.
That's right.
Regent Mayron.
Yes, thank you. A question for Mr. Steves, and then a more general question. So when you talk about advancements in technology or hybrid, Regent Verheugen gave one example. Did you have others in mind that I'm trying to visualize what other technology is out there that we could, what we're not using, could be using that would allow for communication by the public?
Madam Chair, Regent Mayron, we don't have specific technologies in mind. We haven't done a kind of an exhaustive review of those, but we are aware of things like what Regent Verheugen shared. And what we're seeing is that we aren't finding any higher ed boards that are using these kinds of technologies, but others are starting to. And so we just note it as something that is an observation that it does not appear that at least as of yet, higher ed boards have started to adopt some of the latest technologies around public comment, in large part because there are many other agencies, public bodies, that are much more dependent on public comment. They're required to, maybe they're publishing rules regularly and they have to have public comment on that. That's less the case with higher ed boards. And so it makes sense that maybe the higher ed is lagging a bit in that, but it is intriguing and interesting, and we think there may be some potential and opportunity in that space. And so that's why we raised it.
And I think even, at least when looking through this, one thing is, there are some higher ed boards that still only make their audio recordings available. They don't even use Zoom or video in this hybrid environment.
Then I had a
yeah,
second question, and that is, stepping back, and this may be for Regent Farnsworth because the resolution came forward from you initially. I'm trying to understand what it is that we're trying to address. Was there a deficiency in our current, the various processes that we do have make available to the public to comment to us that you felt, and maybe others feel as well, are not adequate to obtain comment and input from the public? And in particular, when I look at because the public, and it's not limited to students, it could be faculty, employees, or the community at large, can communicate with us via email directly, and there's no limitation on how long or substantive their emails are or what the topics are. That does provide a forum for input by the community at large. Nevertheless, this resolution has arisen because I'm assuming that there is some inadequacy or something that you feel or others may feel need to be addressed. And I'm trying to figure out what it is that we're trying to do better, or to what that inadequacy is above and beyond the various ways we have that people can communicate with us already. I recognize, obviously, we have the student regent and we have student representatives, but I understand we don't have a faculty regent, we don't have an employee regent, and so we don't have a community, so we don't have those, I get that. But with the email ability to communicate in substance without any limitation, again, I'm trying to understand, is there something that's inadequate or we're trying to fix or do better as we look at various options that we have?
Regent Farnsworth?
Thank you, Chair Verheugen, and thank you, Regent Mayron, for the question. So I'll address that, and then I think I was on the list anyways to come back to some other stuff. But directly to your question, two things. One, and I'm obviously just speaking on behalf of myself here, I do think that having a public opportunity to address the board in this room, there's more than just symbolism with that. I think it's an important function. The public comment period is an important function of governing bodies, and maybe I'm the only one that has had extensive experience with this and other professional things, ranging from school boards to planning commissions to a lot of other kind of professional interactions with governance bodies I have outside of serving here through work and other affiliations. The neighborhood board I'm on, the committees of the neighborhood board I'm on, all have public comment opportunities. And so the list goes on, and I think I'm sure all of us are familiar with various bodies that have what a more traditional public comment opportunity looks like. Second point that I think also gets at your question is, I don't think that our current policy to address the board is good. I think it's too subjective, and I don't think we should have, the point of making policies and having strong board policies, and we've had presentations in this committee about our policy review process, which I think is really strong and robust. And the point of having policies is to remove subjectivity and to give the board, to give university departments, anyone involving the university, clear expectations about what our policies are and how we operate. And I don't think right now our policy to address the board, which is at least somewhat related to the point of creating a public comment period, gives the public any expectation, gives anyone any expectation who's requesting to speak to the board, any clear idea of why or why not their request would be granted. So I'm a believer in having whatever it ends up looking like, some kind of public way to address the board in this room and utilizing technology. I'm very intrigued and enjoying the discussion so far, but I also don't think that our current policy in our board bylaws of how to address the board is policy that I'm comfortable with, because I think it's too subjective. So those would be my thoughts to your question.
Thank you.
Regent Kenyanya is next on the list, but
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, everyone, for the discussion. I really appreciate the discussion, and I think yesterday, informally over lunch, unrelated, but some of us were talking about school boards, right, and what's become there. So while I'm a proponent of this policy generally, I mean, I do appreciate every consideration because we want this to be constructive, we want it to be productive, and a certain level of decorum, and we've seen that deteriorate elsewhere, right? So I think these are really important considerations. Couple thoughts, I don't know that public engagement is, zero sum, or mutually exclusive. And by that, I mean, by giving this avenue, we don't take away from those that could use other avenues. Something, really important that was brought up last time we had this discussion by, I forgot who, is how, just by the nature of where we meet, it would be Twin Cities centric, right? And we have 5 campuses and stakeholders all over. That leads me to ask, how do we include them more, right? Not, why should we not extend this opportunity? And, for those who wouldn't want to deliver the remarks orally and where that wouldn't make sense, we're not taking away those other avenues. We're not taking away the email. So I think those still remain. I do like the technology conversation, absolutely, because I think it would address some of that. But, I still feel that it can be a and, not an or situation. But, I think one of the things I've observed, and I commented last time, is, people will find an avenue to be heard should they not feel they have the adequate ones. I think I gave the example of public safety last time. When the community felt that we weren't engaging, we were seeing them on the news. And after that, I think we had 2 very productive forums. I felt, and those who attended or watched, I think would agree. And we're continuing. And it's not that we weren't addressing those concerns or working on them. We were, but perception is reality for people at some time. And I think my experience on this board, I think my first meeting was interrupted and many thereafter. I think it's honestly COVID that got us away from that. But I do understand that some people in groups that disrupt meetings, that is part of the intent and probably would do that anyway. But I do think there's others that would take the formal process outlined if it were given. And then lastly, as we were discussing, Regent Swigum, I remembered when we were in Red Wing, you and I were walking before you ditched me in your car and left me to walk the rest of the way. And you told me, Regent Swigum, you told me, look at all these houses in Red Wing. You told me you door knocked every house there. And you told me you loved door knocking and that there was no, better effective way to to understand the needs of your constituents and talk to them. And you're telling me if you could, you door knock all those houses again, right? So there's something to be said about that kind of interaction. So to the extent that we can extend it, I think we should. But at the same time, all the considerations and concerns being brought up by colleagues, they're very valid, and we should, we should consider them and find the appropriate way to implement this here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we'll set aside a separate meeting to unpack those abandonment
Yes.
issues. Regent Farnsworth, did you have additional items?
Yes, thank you, Chair Verhalen. Just to add a few other things. One, I'm really glad that we're having this discussion today, and I really appreciate the work of OBR staff for what you prepared the first time, what you brought back to our second conversation. I think all of this is incredibly helpful. I also appreciate the talk about how we could do this innovatively and solicit public comment and have the University of Minnesota Board of Regents be a leader in that. We've talked about, I think in our presentation last meeting, how many ways our board goes above and beyond to make information to the public. And just by looking at other board websites, just as with an average eye, and maybe an eye a little bit more interested in this stuff, but it's very clear that we provide a lot of information that other boards maybe don't provide. I'll just say that I do think that the significance of the opportunity to be able to address the board in a manner verbally using technology, I think to Regent Kenyani's point, doesn't take away from other opportunities, whether it's via email, seeing university community members at an event, whatnot. One piece, that I wanted to add, and I hope we're able to think about as we go towards the December meeting, and someone mentioned this last time we talked about this, is I think it's important that we're having this conversation as a board. I'm particularly interested, if others outside of this room, outside of the university, feel that we have enough opportunities to engage, or the public has enough opportunities to engage with the board. And I guess a little bit to the spirit of Regent Mayron's question as well, I think that's where part of the impetus for me bringing the resolution forward in June and caring about this topic, because I hear frequently from people that feel that they don't have enough opportunity to address the board in manners, such as being in front of us is significant. And, when someone delivers commentary or feedback or whatever they choose to use their specified time for in a traditional face-to-face engagement, there's really no excuse for those of us, at least who are here physically or on Zoom, to not having heard it. And as opposed to an email that maybe doesn't get responded to, or some people can feel like they're just kind of talking into the wind by sending an email. And I'm sure we all have different practices about how we do or don't respond and catalog and read emails. So I don't want to opine about what other people's strategies are. I can just talk about mine, which is I do appreciate the email venue that we have as well. But I think there really is significance to being in front of the board, being in this boardroom, having opportunities to engage. And I am totally open to what that looks like. So I've been pleased with this conversation about how we can be innovative. I also think, to Regent Rocha's comment from last meeting, we don't have to get this right perfectly the first time. I think there's lots of opportunities for us to create policy, to roll things out, to revise. I think we're really good at that as a board and as an institution. And again, there's many different ways we can do this. And getting on my last point, which is this, I can't remember, I think it's on slide 18 here, under goals of trusteeship, to create trust and demonstrate accountability. And I think moving towards something that would resemble a public comment opportunity creates trust and demonstrates accountability. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, we have 3 new speakers, and then Regent Kenyani, you wanted to go again, just so
So
everyone.
do I, so just see.
All right.
Look both ways, okay.
Then neither of you can complain when we go over time.
Not.
Regent Talurabe.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. I just wanted to add that I think I appreciate the discussion as well. And I do think that even with our best intentions, there will still be people who feel like they don't know how to engage with us. And I think this is also brought up, I was recently with the Student Senate, and even them, they are probably among some of the most educated in terms of understanding how they are engaged in the process, still felt that they didn't have enough interactions with the regents, and that's not about being in front of us in this room. So I'm curious, too, about how we may take the responsibility of listening more and maybe engaging in the process where appropriate with university staff or community in other ways. I do really believe in offering opportunities for people to be engaged, and I appreciated the comment that you made, Chair Verhalen, about really especially as it relates to items of action, because that's when it's important. And I do think that it's good to offer opportunities for that, but also in the spirit of recognizing that just having an open period, which may be more frustrating for the people coming to present if they know that it isn't really helpful in our decision-making. To me, that seems like things to pay attention to. So for me, I do think that it is important to think about where we can use technology to foster more engagement, but also the opportunities for us to be listening more, because I do think it is in that input process and not necessarily about being in front of us in this room. From coming from a community who both may be challenged by language or, transportation, any of those things, I think just making the only time to engage with the board as a part of this process is not necessarily the best approach, so I appreciate the consideration for technology. And then I think I'm also just reminded of Director Steves and Ms. Flotten's last presentations about what the board is supposed to, we are a board, we're not legislating. So the kinds of testimonies that we would normally hear at the legislature or other bodies that have to legislate, I think is a little bit different, and I do feel like that's important to keep thinking about here.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. As usual, previous speakers have made some of the comments I would make much better than I would. Just a few things. Starting with just a response to the comment related to the role of the board and as a policy board, much as a school board is more of a policy board than a legislative body. Even policy boards, I think, review of policy is impacted positively by input, particularly from sides that you may not normally engage. And so I don't necessarily draw a stark distinction, and I don't know that that's what Regent Talarabi was saying, but between a legislative body and a policy body, I think all can benefit from broad input. I am very impressed coming out of this dialogue, the presentation about other ways of engaging. That's not really where I was first understanding this dialogue, but it does make a lot of sense, and particularly when you think about distance issues, but then I would move into the sphere of Regent Kenyanya and saying that I don't necessarily see those as exclusive. I see those as really augmenting, and I would be more inclined to an all of the above approach, that permitting folks to reach us from their home office, living room, whatever, through technology is a great opportunity for that input and for accountability in that respect. But I also would suggest that interaction, again, much off of the Red Wing door knocking experience, I mean, that interaction of that variety is very valuable. I would highly discourage a young suitor to offer a marriage proposal via email. I think those are far better done in person, and I also think that us engaging, this is a much better means of us engaging topics even like this than it would be via email or through video recordings of our thoughts. I think that's an important part of the human experience and the dynamic. I would also point out that from an in-person opportunity advocacy point, one of our Big Ten peers actually ended up finally addressing a fairly major scandal via some victims of some inappropriate behavior at that institution by finally coming and making a public appearance. They had indicated they had tried other means. And so, I mean, it can even come down to that point where that comes down to that accountability point. And so I think, not that that's necessarily what you're hoping is the result, but at the same time, if that is the only means people have to sort of bring things forward, I would much rather err on the side of being more open, and the perception of being more open as a board, I think would be a great value to us. So I would be in the position of advocating for this development of the technologies that we're talking about, and as the chair was talking through what would be available to not just the board but to the public. But I also very much think that having that opportunity to provide that live input is a value, and I would support that if that's put in front of the board. Thank you.
Regent Hipsch.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. I agree with the technology piece that's been talked about. I just want to point out, as a county commissioner for 12 years, I was sat in hundreds of public forums, for everything ranging from a new road to lakeshore, whatever it is. And where public forums worked were on individual specific issues where you needed to know the points and counterpoints and get everybody's opinion to learn everything that's going on in a certain area or a certain specific issue. And so, I mean, I would be opposed to expanding our public forums for specific issues, but just to have an open mic, I think would be not a good policy, because we don't have the counterpoints, we don't have all the people in the room talking about is it the truth, is it fair, And so, but I agree with the technology piece, and I think that all of us are fairly readily available. And I agree with Steve Swigum when he talked about the confidentiality. We all deal with emails differently and whatever else, but I think there's a lot of people that want to give us advice and not have the whole world know about it too. So, thank you.
Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence. I'll be very brief. I was digging through my email, and I found what I was looking for. Perhaps, as Regent Mayron was speaking, it made me think of this. I have two resolutions here, one from 2017 from the Student Senate, passing a resolution asking for just this, and then one in 2018 from the UMD student government, passing a similar resolution in support of this. So this is something that the students have been discussing for a while. I should note I was a non-voting member of the student government, but it does say here President Kenyanya supports this action right here. But just a thought, and I'll be done here, but if I'm trying to remember maybe why I supported this, because this was after I had been a student rep for a year and was now back in student government in Duluth. And I think maybe even in the nascent days of my public service and leadership, I had learned something that you all probably know much better than me, and it's that as you lean into leadership a little more, you find yourself maybe a little more removed from the people you're leading or representing. That's something I found to be true then and even now, and is probably why I supported this resolution then. But I thought this was very interesting, and I will forward this to Director Steves to perhaps support in the review process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and I think that same timeframe was when this board previously discussed this issue.
Okay.
And had a forum, had a discussion like this on public engagement. I'm seeing a head nod, so from our local historians. So I'm gonna,
Archives.
yes, exactly. Regent Mayron. And then we'll move on.
Or, thank you.
Next steps.
As I've been hearing the various comments that are, have come forward, and then thinking about what the board office is going to work on and to develop by way of possible policy changes, what I would be interested in, and I think I'm capturing some of the thoughts here, is being open to having a set period of time where individuals could address the board as part of our board operations meetings that we have, whether that's a half hour or an hour or some set period of time. I think the issue as to whether it's an open forum on any topic or rather limited to the issues that are on the agenda, which I think is what Regent Hipsch was moving towards, I think is worthy of discussion. I don't know if we yet have consensus on that. You could go either way. The forum serves a purpose either way to get input. So we'll have to debate that issue as to whether we want to limit it or suggest to those who are providing input that they would be best served to address the items on the agenda, but that the board will entertain any topic that someone wants to communicate with. That's an option as well. I do think we should have something that limits the amount of time each speaker can provide input. I don't think a minute is adequate for anyone to talk about anything, including ourselves. And so whether that's 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 4 minutes, I do think we need a limit, but it has to give someone long enough to be able to communicate what the input is they want us to hear. I do think we need to look in technology. I think we're hearing there's a great interest in that and in allowing people to bring forward if they can't be here in person to address us, then whether they appear by Zoom or some other means live, or whether they upload a video that and that is then shown to us while we're here in the board meeting, to allow them to appear as much live as they possibly can from whatever location. I think that's worth looking into. And I think that anything we do, we should look at it as a pilot for some set period of time, so we then intentionally come back and evaluate what the outcome of this is, good, bad, whatever the metrics are we want to use to determine whether this is something we should proceed with on a going forward basis.
Well, you wrapped up my talking points very nicely there. So I think, this discussion has brought forward a lot of these items, and we'll look forward then to December and what OBR puts together, kind of coalescing around this, but also identifying the areas where we will need to have a more in-depth discussion about kind of what we want to move forward then into our February meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So with the conclusion of that item, we're a little over time, but we'll move forward. Ms. Flotten, don't go anywhere yet. I wanted to take a minute and recognize that today is Ms. Flotten's last time appearing before us as a member of our Office of the Board of Regents. She will still be within the University of Minnesota community, and we're very thankful for that. But on behalf, at least, of the Governance and Policy Chair and Vice Chair, we wanted to say thank you for everything that you've done and gathering information, bringing us a lot of really helpful items for discussion, and keeping us all in line as well. Vice Chair Hipsch, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Just want to say thank you, and I know you're not going far, so we can find you, so.
Thank you. It's very kind.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Did she have to
She
do
should
the
go
motion?
around the horse.
I won't subject her to that. Our second item is an opportunity for the board to provide input into the selection criteria used for the 2023 Regent selection process. Minnesota statute requires that the Regent Candidate Advisory Council, also called RCAC, to consult with the board when creating its selection criteria. So in August, the board office, at the request of Vice Chair Hipsch and myself, contacted RCAC on behalf of the committee and invited one of their members to attend this meeting to walk through the selection criteria and hear our feedback directly. The RCAC determined that They would like to continue the existing practice of inviting a member of staff and a member of the Board of Regents to present the thoughts of the board at an RCAC meeting, and that they would also, their selection criteria committee looks forward to viewing today's Governance and Policy Committee meeting via YouTube, as it did in 2018 and 2020, and take that into consideration. So with that, in our board packet is a list at pages 22 and 23, a list of the selection criteria used for the last cycle that RCAC reviewed for purposes of reviewing applications for regents in that cycle. And so we will be looking at these to talk about them, but just so everyone is aware, later this month, Regent Mayron and Executive Director Steves will attend that RCAC meeting and provide some additional input at that time. But with that, Executive Director Steves, if you would start the discussion, and then we'll go from there.
Madam Chair, you've set up the discussion very well. I would just maybe offer one reminder, which is I often find that regents have lots of thoughts and opinions about the process itself, the regent election process. This is not a conversation about that. This is a conversation about the criteria that the Regent Candidate Advisory Council will use to solicit and screen applicants for the position. And so those are in the docket, and your feedback is welcomed.
And as people gather their thoughts, I do want to just briefly, Regent Davenport was unable to be here today, but did provide some brief comments, and one of her comments was that she was particularly interested in attracting candidates with strong business and finance real estate experience to complement our current skill and knowledge backgrounds of the current regent members, and wanted to pass that along for purposes of this discussion and for RCAC to consider. Any other comments? If nobody else speaks up, Regent Swigham's going to go, so.
I'm waiting.
All right, go ahead, Regent Svigham.
Madam Chair, to RCAC board, who probably is wiser, certainly wiser than me, and probably wiser than any of us sitting here in their selection process, I would just give some very, very brief and general comments regarding their request by statute. The first is in the seeking of regents to find people of balance. But balance, I think, is extremely important in life. It's certainly important as a regent. We're not regents for just for Crookston, or just for the agricultural community, or just for students. We're regents in the best interest of the entire university, and we have to balance all those interests and all those concerns, sometimes very conflicting requests and concerns. We got to balance, to seek balance, and second of all, we ought to have differences. There's no doubt that that's part of this process, that we have differences of positions, differences of values, but at such time that we move forward from the board here, we need to be able to work as a team. And I think that the RCAC should look for people who can work as a team together in the best interest of the university. That once a decision is made, we're out there as a team working in that best interest and speaking as a body, one, without just trying to be individual members that don't recognize the mission of the university as a whole. And that's balance and teamwork. That would be my two comments that RCAC should be looking for.
Anyone else? One item that comes to mind for me, particularly given the timing, is, this will be the 2023 election. We have MPAC 2025 metrics and a strategic plan. And so this class of regents will certainly be taking on developing what the next MPACT will look like. And so a knowledge of where MPACT 2025 set out, looking to 2025 without planning on a global pandemic in the middle of that, where it sits right now and what items may need to be carried forward from that into the next strategic plan for this university, but also where our successes have been seen in that, I think is important as well in the process. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. I would just say I appreciate Director Steve's comments because I would have thoughts about process, but to narrow to this topic, I regret that Regent Davenport's not here because I'd like to explore a little bit what she was saying. It seems to me that her comments would fall under 13 and that as well as subject matter expertise. Because I'm kind of curious when you talk about having business and financial experience as a policy board, I just want to make sure that we're not trying to supplant the administrative expertise with our own personal opinions and personal expertise. And so I would be very interested to know how she would see that interplay with this. But I would say that to me, I think there are a lot of different areas where I'd love to have expertise on, people coming in with various backgrounds, and I think that's covered by 13. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Well, we made up a little bit of time. So I will just close this item with thank you to the RCAC for the work that they do and for giving us the opportunity to weigh in, and wish them the best of luck in sifting through applications as they receive them this fall. So thank you. And with that, we are adjourned until,
Okay, we'll adjourn for now and recess and reconvene at 10:25 for the full Board of Regents meeting.
thanks.